She stood on my porch at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, arms wrapped around herself even though it wasn't cold, and before I could even ask if she was okay, she said the sentence that changed both our lives. "You're the one I wanted to hear it from me." I didn't know what it was yet. I just knew her voice was shaking in a way I'd never heard before, and that was enough to make my whole chest go tight before she said another word. "I'm Ethan Barrett. I'm 33, and my neighbor, Sophie Lang, had lived 2 doors down from me for almost 4 years by that point. We weren't the kind of neighbors who exchanged pleasantries at the mailbox and called it a relationship. We were the kind who ended up on each other's porches at odd hours because life got loud and neither of us wanted to be alone with it. She fed my cat when I traveled for work. I fixed her garbage disposal twice and pretended not to notice when she overpaid me in banana bread. We'd built something slow and steady over 4 years, something that didn't have a clean name, not quite friendship, not quite anything else. Just two people who had become each other's emergency contact without ever filling out the paperwork. Sophie was 31, a physical therapist, the kind of person who spent her whole professional life taking care of other people's bodies and somehow never seemed to think much about her own. She ran 3 mornings a week. She ate better than anyone I knew. She was, by every outward measure, the healthiest person on our street. So when she showed up on my porch that Tuesday looking like she'd aged 5 years since I'd seen her at the mailbox that morning, I knew immediately this wasn't about a broken disposal. "Sophie," I said, standing up from my chair. "What happened?" She didn't answer right away. She just stood there at the bottom of my porch steps, arms crossed, looking at me like she was trying to figure out how to say something she'd already rehearsed 100 times in the car and still couldn't get to come out right. "Can I sit down?" she finally asked. "Sophie, you can sit down in my house whenever you want. You know that." She climbed the steps slowly, like each one required a decision, and sat in the chair across from mine instead of going inside. I sat back down and waited, because 20 years of watching my own mother work through hard news had taught me that some people need silence before they need questions. "I got some test results back today," she said finally, looking at her hands instead of at me. Something cold moved through my stomach. "Okay, I've been having some symptoms for a few months. Fatigue, mostly. Some other things I kept explaining away because I didn't want them to be real." She took a breath that shook on the way in. "I saw a specialist 3 weeks ago. Today I got the full picture." I didn't say anything. I just waited, because I could see she was building up to the actual words, and I didn't want to make her get there faster than she was ready for. "It's cancer, Ethan." The words landed in the quiet porch air like something physical. I felt them in my chest before my brain even finished processing them. "It's early," she added quickly, like she needed to soften it for both of us. They caught it early. The doctor was actually optimistic. "There's a treatment plan. Surgery, then probably some chemo. The odds are good." I know the odds are good. I've read every study I could find in the last 3 hours. She was talking fast now, the way people do when they're trying to outrun the fear instead of sitting inside it. I reached over without thinking and put my hand over hers on the armrest between our chairs. She stopped talking. "I haven't told my parents yet," she said, quieter now. "I haven't told my sister. I haven't told anyone at work. You're the first person I've said those words out loud to." I looked at her, trying to understand what that meant. Why me, out of everyone in her life? "Why me?" I asked, because I needed to know, and because some part of me suspected the answer mattered more than either of us had ever admitted out loud. Sophie looked up at me then, her eyes bright and unsteady. "Because you're the one I wanted to hear it from me," she said. "Not from my mom calling you in a panic. Not from the neighborhood grapevine because somebody saw an oncology parking pass on my dashboard. From me. I wanted you to hear it the way it actually happened, sitting across from me, seeing my face when I said it." Something in that answer hit me harder than the diagnosis itself had, which felt strange and a little guilty to admit even inside my own head. "I'm glad you came here," I said. "I didn't know where else to go," she admitted. I sat in my car outside the hospital for 40 minutes trying to figure out who to call first. My mom, my sister, my best friend from college. And every single time I picked up my phone, I put it back down, because none of those calls felt like the first one I needed to make. And this one did. She nodded, wiping quickly at her eyes like she was annoyed at herself for crying. This one did. We sat there for a long time after that, not talking much, just existing in the same space, while she let herself feel whatever she needed to feel without an audience demanding she perform strength she didn't have yet. At some point I went inside and made tea, because it was the only useful thing I could think to do with my hands. And when I came back out, she was staring at the string of porch lights I'd never gotten around to taking down after last summer. I keep thinking about all the versions of this conversation I imagined having with my family, she said when I sat back down. In my head, I always pictured telling my mom first. That's supposed to be the order, right? Family first. There's no supposed to, I said. There's just what actually happens. She looked over at me. I think I've known for a while that you'd become the person I'd tell things to first. I just never had to test it with something this big before. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything right away. I just let it sit there in the space between us, because it felt important, and because I was beginning to understand that this porch conversation was about more than just a diagnosis. It was about 4 years of small, quiet choices that had built something neither of us had bothered to name. Can I ask you something? I said eventually. She nodded. When you were sitting in that parking lot deciding who to call, what made you pick me? Sophie was quiet for a moment, turning her mug slowly in her hands. Because you're the person who doesn't need me to be okay, she said. My mom would need me to be strong for her, so she wouldn't fall apart. My sister would immediately start Googling everything and turn it into a research project, because that's how she copes. My friends would want to fix it, plan things, organize meal trains. And all of that is love, Ethan, I know that. But in that parking lot, I didn't want anyone's version of love that came with a job attached. I wanted somebody who would just sit there while I said the actual sentence out loud for the first time. I can do that, I said. I know, she said. That's why I came here. The next few weeks were harder than either of us expected, even with the doctor's careful optimism. Sophie told her parents 2 days later, and her mother cried the way mothers do, loud and unguarded. And Sophie called me afterward just to breathe for a few minutes before she had another conversation with her sister. I went with her to her second appointment, sitting in a waiting room chair that had clearly hosted 1,000 anxious people before me, holding a magazine I never actually read. She squeezed my hand in the hallway right before they called her back, and neither of us said anything about what that meant. We didn't have to. Some things you just start understanding without needing the vocabulary for it yet. Surgery got scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Sophie kept working half days, kept running short, careful loops around the block instead of her usual routes, kept insisting she was fine even on the days she clearly wasn't. I started showing up at her door most evenings without asking, the way she used to show up at mine. And somewhere in that stretch of ordinary evenings, folding laundry while she napped on the couch, picking up prescriptions, sitting with her while she cried about things that had nothing directly to do with the diagnosis and everything to do with fear, we stopped pretending we were just neighbors who happened to be close. It was a Thursday, about a month after that first porch conversation, when she finally said the thing neither of us had said out loud yet. We were sitting on my porch again, same chairs, and she was picking at the edge of a blanket she'd wrapped around herself even though the night was warm. I need to tell you something else, she said, and I need you to actually let me finish before you respond, because I've been building up the nerve for this longer than the diagnosis. I turned toward her. Okay, that night I told you first, she said. It wasn't only because you're easy to talk to, or because you don't panic, or any of the practical reasons I gave you. It was because somewhere in the last 4 years, you became the person whose reaction to my life actually mattered most to me. More than my mom's. More than anyone's. And I didn't want to sit with that realization alone in a hospital parking lot without telling you. Especially not now, when I don't know exactly what my future looks like. My throat tightened. Sophie, I'm not saying this because I'm scared and looking for something to hold on to, she said quickly, like she'd anticipated exactly what I might think. I've thought about this for weeks, long before the diagnosis, if I'm honest. I just didn't have a reason brave enough to say it until I was staring down something that made every unsaid thing in my life feel ridiculous to keep carrying around. I reached over and took her hand, the same way I had that first night, except this time neither of us let go after a minute. I felt it too, I admitted, for longer than I probably should have without saying anything. Why didn't you? She asked. Because you were my neighbor, and then you were my friend, and then you were the person whose cat I fed and whose disposal I fixed, and somewhere in there it felt like too much to risk by saying it out loud. And now? She asked. Now, I said, I think I'd rather risk it than spend however long we have pretending I don't feel it. Sophie's eyes filled, but she was smiling this time, the first real smile I'd seen from her in weeks. However long we have better be a very long time, she said. I plan on it, I told her. Her surgery went well. The doctors got clear margins, and the follow-up scans came back the way everyone had hoped they would. Recovery was slow and unglamorous, full of bad days tangled up with good ones, and I was there for most of it, not because I felt obligated, but because I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Somewhere between the second round of chemo and the day her hair started growing back in soft dark patches, she kept touching like she couldn't quite believe it was happening. We stopped being neighbors who had become something more and just became something. A year after that first porch conversation, Sophie got her all-clear scan. We celebrated with cheap champagne on the same porch where she'd once told me the hardest sentence of her life, and at some point in the evening, she looked at me and said, "You know, I used to think telling you first was about needing a calm person in the room. Now I think I just always knew you were the person I wanted standing next to me for everything after, good news and bad." I think about that a lot, how one terrifying sentence on a Tuesday night turned into the rest of both our lives. How sometimes the person we choose to tell the hardest things to is really just an answer we've already known for a long time, waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. So tell me, if someone you cared about most showed up at your door one night with news that could change everything, would you want to be the first person they told? And has anyone ever told you something hard and, in doing so, told you something else entirely about how they feel about you? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.